Okay, perfect. We're just going to go ahead and get started and I'll introduce y'all and dive in. But thanks everyone so much for being here. Getting kicked off. We are joined with two members of the Equity Alliance, two really awesome people. So I'll introduce them. I'm Natalie Schilling, Policy and Advocacy Associate at Awake, and we are doing a Policy 101 Beyond the Minimum, centered on equity-centered economic policy. We've been doing a series of these summer trainings. This is our third of four. So thanks y'all for have been at the last two, going to be at the next one. We're really excited to close this out. So up first, we're going to talk a little bit about our amazing fellow panelists. So I'm actually going to do LeLann first, just because I have that in my notes. LeLann Evans is a seasoned political strategist, community organizer, and founder of Our Future Voters, a civic education initiative focused on empowering youth in underrepresented communities through voter education and grassroots engagement. With over a decade of leadership in political campaigns and advocacy, LeLann has managed field operations across local, state, and federal elections, mobilizing thousands of voters, training organizers, and driving measurable increases in civic participation. We love that, particularly among Black voters and young people. As a former state organizing director for Michigan, LeLann's led statewide voter outreach and equity-centered engagement programs. He has also championed community-led initiatives that resulted in local policy wins, including expanding school safety measures. Oh, let me make sure that we're recording. Okay, we are. Sorry. I was like, before I keep going. Now, through his AI-driven consulting firm, Fourth Eye Media, he equips campaigns and nonprofits with cutting-edge media tools to amplify their message and scale their impact. LeLann is passionate about building power from the ground up and continues to inspire action through authentic leadership and bold innovation. So, yay. Welcome, LeLann. We got fellow incredible organizer. Excited to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, moving on to Conchetta. Conchetta Willis is a dynamic communications leader and community organizer with over a decade of experience driving meaningful social change in the Mississippi Delta and Middle Tennessee. Currently serving as the statewide community mobilization manager for the Equity Alliance, leading the charge and outreach in Montgomery County while supervising regional managers across the state. Willis holds a bachelor's and master's degree in communications, as well as a graduate certificate in diversity, equity, and inclusion from Austin Peay State University. She is currently a second-year doctoral student in the Rhetoric, Communication, Interdisciplinary Studies program at Clemson University. Wow, how do you sleep? Her diverse background includes healthcare administration, where she assisted patients who needed financial assistance, and public relations for major companies looking to advance their brand through corporate philanthropy initiatives. Willis has published research on women's advocacy issues and serves on boards including the Clarksville-Montgomery County NAACP, Big Brothers Big Sisters of Clarksville, and the Imagination Library of Montgomery County. She's passionate about building sustainable community power through cross-sector partnership and innovative organizing strategies. Welcome, Conchetta. We're so
Thank you.
so
Thank you.
Yay. All right. Well, you guys know me. Natalie Schilling, Policy and Advocacy Associate, was a social worker at Belmont and dove right into Awake. So excited to talk about this. So a little outline of what we're going to be talking about today. So we're starting with what lens we're going to be examining this equity-centered policy through, and that is through a gender and racial justice lens. Awake as a primarily gender equity-focused organization, joined with T, a primarily racial justice organization. We're joining forces and looking through this lens through an intersectional focus. Then we will be moving on to what is economic justice, so really framing what that is. Then moving on to minimum wage, income inequality, and wage gaps, and then housing, childcare, healthcare, and then closing us out with some call to actions and next steps for y'all to get involved. Woohoo! So, starting off strong, we're talking about a gender and racial justice lens. So as I said, we're looking at it through that. And what that kind of entails is critically examining how historic and current economic policy has excluded women and Black people's thriving in Tennessee and beyond. And those are the Tennessee Blue Books. If you've never seen those, that's where our laws are held. We're also intentionally focusing on the disparate impacts of the compounding factors of inequality through racism and sexism on Black women. If you've never heard the term misogynoir, that is the description of racism, sexism's impact on Black women specifically. So we're definitely going to be looking at that lens. You'll see that throughout. And then looking even broader, any type of gender and racial justice lens should be listened to directly from those most impacted, and then focused on dreaming and scheming with those most impacted to create policy that advances economic justice. That's how we're going to be looking through everything today. And then founding us in what we're actually talking about is economic justice. So this is more than just raising the minimum wage. So if you thought you were here just to talk all about that, we're going to be going a lot deeper. And this really looks like access to material resources that are free from burdensome economic systems and policies, where all people have the opportunity to thrive. That's kind of the lens we're viewing things through, and the basics. And then, Conchetta, I'm going to have you read some awesome quotes to ground us in the burdensome economic system we currently live in.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Natalie. In finding the perfect quote for this moment, even for myself, I had to come from a place of thinking where policy isn't abstract. It's about the families that we work for and with every day. And so this pulled me to one of my sheroes, Alice Walker, who said, without money of one's own in a capitalistic society, there's no such thing as independence. And that capitalism is a big problem, because with capitalism, you're just going to keep buying and selling things until there's nothing else to buy and sell, which means gobbling up the planet. And so Walker believed that capitalism harms both people and the environment. And she viewed it as a system that takes more than it gives. And she has a lens from a womanist perspective. So she emphasizes the importance of economic systems that prioritize caring for people and fostering community rather than solely generating profits. And since June the 2nd, we at the Equity Alliance, we've knocked over 10,000 doors, conversing with Tennessee families about their economic realities. And what we've learned is that economic policy is not just numbers. It's not academic. It's deeply personal. It's the difference between a family building generational wealth or living paycheck to paycheck. It's whether a parent like myself can take time off with their child when they're sick. It's whether someone can afford to live in a community, in the same city that they work in. It's whether someone can have a good quality of life. And tonight, LeLann and I will share those community voices with you behind these policies that we talk about. Because again, economic justice isn't something that happens to communities. It's something that happens with communities.
Yes. Thank you so much. Yeah, you guys will hear a lot about their incredible door knocking. They got some good stuff for you. So moving off of that quote and just focusing on what this piece of equity-centered policy means, we always want to ensure that any type of policy, and then especially equity-centered, is informed by lived experience. So using those door knocking data, actually speaking to the folks who would be impacted by policy, hearing from them, and then furthermore creating it with those most impacted. So not on top, but living and creating with those most impacted. And if there's any type of enforcement mechanism or anything, always ensuring that there's integrity and justice in that enforcement and implementation. Always important. So LeLann's going to talk a little bit of this, which Conchetta kind of touched on already, but we're going to keep on going with it.
Yes. So policy shapes reality in the sense that the things that we are going through, when we look at it from that policy experience, sometimes we look at it from just what's on the paper and don't get the full concepts of how this is actually shaping generations. And it's not just about the right now. And so economic policy that doesn't intentionally center race and gender only address the symptoms and not and doesn't create a long-term solution. And so when we are looking, or as we go through this, and later on we'll get into the numbers from the doors that we've been knocking, but the next few slides have data that I've done research on that personally affects myself and those that I've been around. And they come from the In Our Own Voice National Black Women's Reproductive Justice Organization. And so some of the numbers that I saw from their research says that in Tennessee, Black women earn just 68 cents for every dollar earned by a white man. So the wage gap is 32 cents. And so when doing the math, that means that a black woman must work until she's 79 to make what a white man makes at the age of 80. And we all know that that 20-year age gap makes a huge difference, again, when we start talking about healthcare, when we start talking about being able to enjoy your family, actually live life fully. And so understanding that these policies continue to shape those around us, around me personally. Again, this personal story and lived experiences. You can go to the next slide. I'm going to wrap it all together after the numbers. But only around 44% of Black Tennesseans own homes versus over 73% of white residents. And so, again, growing up as a Black man in a community where a lot of my friends grew up in a single parent household or lived in apartments, lived in these realities of, for us as kids, not truly understanding, but now that I'm older, looking at these numbers, have a clear understanding that policies have shaped everything, all of our lived experiences, society around us. And then going into 35% of female-headed households live in poverty, including 22% of Black women compared to 12% of white women. Those two slides, all of that information, when coupled together with understanding that there are uh, people who live with their mother, single Black mother households, understanding that that data is already shaping these children to have a less chance at succeeding in life. I believe the statistic said that Tennessee has like a 10% chance to move up in the economic work class. And so understanding that already having a small window of opportunity to get out of the lived experiences you're going through, when you couple that with all of the data and the policies that have shaped the society that you're in, you see that the odds are even furthermore against you in being able to succeed in life. And so wanting to really just set the tone for what, when we talk about policy, we're not just talking about the numbers. We're not just talking about currently. We're not just looking at what the effects are today, but the long-term understanding that me as a kid growing up didn't understand that the policies that were being made around the time that I was too young to even understand what a policymaker was or what legislation was, those decisions shaped everything around me, even into my adulthood, to now even be in the position to do the work that I'm doing, to say, hey, the kids are the real focal point when we need to look at policy, because that is who life we're actually making decisions around. And so just wanted to give a little foreshadow of the work that we've been doing across the state of Tennessee with the Equity Alliance, and some of the numbers that, again, are going to show policies having long-term generational effects into how people are going to be able to move up in wealth class.
Whitney Houston told us that the children are the future. So, yes. Um, just to back up what LeLann was saying, when we talk economic justice for marginalized communities, we have to know and understand that it is totally different from traditional economic policy. And one of the first things that we have to include in that is breaking cycles of exclusion. For generations, policies like redlining, discriminatory lending, and exclusion from New Deal programs systemically blocked Black and Brown and Indigenous and other marginalized communities out of wealth building opportunities. And so economic justice means that we don't just move barriers, we actively create policies that repair this historical harm. So we build pathways to prosperity. I love that. Pathways to prosperity that were denied to our ancestors. We have to. And then, second, we need to understand that economic justice recognizes that we need more individual solutions. when entire communities lack access to things like quality jobs, affordable housing, healthcare, there is no way you can bootstrap your way out of systemic exclusion. You can't. So individual solutions cannot fix this collective problem. We need policies that lift whole communities, not just individuals. Which brings me to my third one. Ultimately, economic justice is intersectional understanding. Economic justice does not impact or affect everyone equally. It hits hardest at the intersections. I'm a Black woman, so I'm facing both racial and gender gaps. The LGBTQ plus individual experiencing employment discrimination. The disabled community member is excluded from economic opportunities altogether. So true economic justice means that we're addressing multiple overlapping systems of oppression.
Yes. Amazing. So diving into the meat of it, starting with minimum wage, income inequality, and wage gaps. I'm going to ground us in some of the higher level data. They're going to talk a lot more specifically about the data they've collected, and then we'll go into policies. So specifically looking at the minimum wage, you've probably heard the refute to minimum wages that they will cause high prices and increase inflation, and that raising the minimum wage will destroy small businesses. So I just wanted to start off the bat just busting those myths. So corporations are already increasing prices without properly increasing wages to maximize profit. In other words, they don't need no permission from raising wages to raise their profits and raise their prices. So we saw in 2024 that prices rose 3.4% versus only a 1% increase in actual costs to make their goods, make their services. So saying prices will increase is an excuse to keep profit margins high and CEO profits high, and shortchange the people actually doing the labor. So just starting off busting those myths. And then just another graph showing the impact of not increasing wages with inflation. We see the impact of real wages. So that's what folks take home after paying all of these exorbitant prices for things. And that has led that real wages fall 1.1% short of where they were 4 years ago, considering the raise of cost of living and prices. So that's that one. And then thinking about this argument about small businesses, that if we raise this minimum wage, it'll bankrupt small businesses. But what we really see is that raising minimum wage actually reduces turnover and cost for training and increases productivity, which then saves businesses money in the long term. So just in this study by the National Bureau of Economic Research, they found that a 10% increase in wages led to a 1.2% decrease in turnover rates, which then we see a further increase in revenue, reduced recruitment costs, and training costs. So there is this myth perpetuated that it'll bankrupt small businesses, but really see it's an investment in the folks that are working for these companies and will long-term provide opportunity and decrease turnover. So moving into what is an actual livable wage, because you've probably heard that term. So take it away, y'all.
So as we were building this portion of the presentation, I have a marketing background and I love using personas. And we were able to build a persona based off of the stories that we've heard across the state, particularly here in Montgomery County. And so I created Taylor. Taylor, of course, is a Tennessean who works making minimum wage, $7.25 an hour. The federal minimum hasn't changed since 2009. So if someone works a full-time job like Taylor at minimum wage, they're making about $15,000 a year, or about $1,257 a month before taxes. So we have Taylor, who lives in Montgomery County, where the average rent is about $1,200 a month. They have one child, meaning that they're looking at about $800 a month for childcare, which for some will say that's not bad, but at its most is $1,200. And we can't forget that Taylor has to pay anywhere between $400 to $600 a month for their healthcare premiums through their job. And so now that is just childcare, rent, and healthcare premiums for Taylor and this one child. We haven't even factored in the expenses of food, utilities, transportation, clothes, medicines. So we're looking at $2,400 to $3,200 a month for basic survival. But the minimum wage only pays Taylor $1,257 a month. The math literally doesn't work. A full-time minimum wage job only covers 42% of what families actually need to survive. So a true livable wage for a person in Taylor's, who is our average person behind our doors, would be a minimum of $22 an hour, no less than $18. That is what it actually takes for these families to meet their basic needs. And maybe, just maybe, start to build some type of economic stability.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think we fail to keep in perspective just how much the minimum wage it falls short. So appreciate that. So diving into, we compound that livable wage with income inequality and just the trouble to even get similar comparable incomes based on different groups. So just looking at racial income inequality, this graph is from 2018, but we've seen that a report by the National Community Reinvestment Coalition, the racial wealth gap actually has remained virtually unchanged from 1992 to 2022. So we can hold these to be about the same, but the differences in median household income between white and Black households across the country varies widely. See, based on all the shades of green here, but we can see the largest margins in the South and Midwest, sticking in that 30 to 50% range difference between median household incomes of white families versus Black families. Seeing that huge impact, just picturing 50% more for the same family, just different racial makeups. And then just looking at race and women inequality, we see that working full-time versus part-time, we see the difference from Latina women, Native American women, AAPI women, and then going up from there, Black women, white women, and Asian American women, just seeing that difference based on race. And we already know that women make up less than men make. So just looking at that data, it's always a lot to take in, especially women losing 400,000 to the gender wage gap over their careers. And that is obviously intensified based on race and all the other intersectional identities. Just seeing the impact of income inequality. Those are just some figures. And then getting a little bit more personal, pass it back to Conchetta.
So I wanted to take a minute to welcome you all to our world, the world of women in organizing, particularly Black women who have been the backbone of every major social justice movement in this country. There's something that people may not know, is that Black women lead approximately 73% of community organizations in Black communities. We're the ones knocking on doors, organizing meetings, fighting for this policy change that we're speaking of. But here's the kicker, because most of the work is either completely unpaid or severely underpaid. We're literally building community power while struggling to keep the power on. And this connects directly with the wage gaps that Natalie was speaking of. Black women earning 63 cents for every dollar than white men. For Black single mothers, that's the majority of Black mothers in many communities. And the median annual income is that of $26,000 to $35,000. So that's 40% of Black women being the primary breadwinners for their family. Now, again, let's do the math. If you're making $26,000 a year and you're supporting your family, but you're also expected to lead the charge and fight for community change in your spare time, where exactly is that spare time supposed to come from? So this is how those wage gaps compound into other economic challenges. Because when Black women are paid less and we have less time and resources to engage in the very organizing work that could change the system that we're stuck in, it creates this cycle. Low wages means less time for advocacy and activism. This means systems stay unchanged. This means we perpetuate and we uphold low wages. But what are we doing about it? I can say that the Equity Alliance and Awake, we center Black women's leadership. It's not just our mission, but it's in our practice. We pay organizers a living wage. We provide childcare at our events. We recognize that economic justice and women's leadership aren't separate issues. So they're the same fight for us. And because when Black women have economic power, we have the resources, we have the time to fully engage and immerse ourselves in advocacy and organizing work. So it's a policy win for our company. No doubt about it. No doubt about it.
I did just want to add something real quick because hearing you talk about that also brings up the fact about like the medical side of all of that. Because when you are working two, three jobs and fighting the good fight in the community, and you're expected to do all of that, even the ones who are able to wear that superwoman cape and do that, what is the mental effect? What is the physical health effect that that plays? And so just again, understanding the full
Mm.
the full effect of policies and things like that. That's so interesting.
Absolutely. How can you build a leader and you're struggling, build a leader or even be a leader and struggling to pay your rent
Yeah.
or your mortgage?
Mm. And that emphasizes, we'll talk a little bit later, policy isn't just at the top level, the government level. It also means advocating within the circles. So if you volunteer somewhere organizing and frequently over and over, they're asking Black women to show up for free, maybe that's you having a conversation saying, hey, we purport to say that we are supporting Black women, that we love Black women. It's not really looking like that. You're expecting them to show up for you and work for free. Are you really? So, might look like that. A little different. Just saying. And always call us out if we're not doing a good job. All right, we'll keep moving for time. I feel like we could probably stay on that for like 30 hours, and I would, but let's keep moving. So just kind of further looking into income inequality and the different intersections of folks, this kind of hit me really hard, that 1/3 of disabled LGBTQ plus adults report earning less than 30,000 in the past year. So you can really see the impact of the intersectional identities of being queer and disabled, and just how that impacts folks. You can also just see disabled folks in this graph, the blue line, and then non-disabled queer folks in the green line. So just looking at that comparison and just how much are earning less than 30,000 or in that mid-range. And then looking at the penalty for being a parent, how that differs for mothers and fathers. Mothers are tended to expected to carry the burden of childcare when they're unable to find childcare. And we see mothers being penalized for having more children or even just one child versus fathers experiencing, if not a bonus, at least allowed to keep their jobs. And so we know that wage penalties for parent women earnings often lead to career interruptions, reduced work hours, choosing less demanding, lower paying jobs to accommodate these childcare responsibilities. That's just not a burden that we see for the fathers near as much. So just thinking about that impact of parenting and reproductive justice in that space. And then keeping on, so thinking about in these jobs, paid leave, you might have heard of FMLA. So this is our only real federal policy in terms of leave. And I just want to emphasize that this is covered employees entitled to unpaid job protective leave. So that's not paid leave for family and medical reasons and requires the continuation of health benefits. And those covered employees, people that actually get FMLA, are private sector employees with 50 plus employees and most government entities. So that's really our only leave policy at the federal level that protects us, and it's not fantastic. And then just thinking about paid leave here in Tennessee, we see that 76% of Tennesseans don't have access to paid leave. And further, among the lowest 10% of earners, only 1 in 20 have access to paid leave. And in Tennessee, a typical worker who takes 4 weeks of unpaid leave loses greater than $3,100 in income. And so that importance of paid leave allowing workers to receive compensation while taking time off to care for family or one's health, we're seeing that we are falling quite short here in Tennessee with a complete lack of real paid leave policies unless you're certain state employees. And you might ask, like, why would paid leave be important to economic justice? We know that historically, people of color and women have been blocked from paid leave and other workplace benefits. This has been a historical policy and continues to happen today. Whereas comprehensive paid leave policies help to rectify some of these disparities and fostering greater diversity in the workforce by allowing caregivers, by allowing people of different identities to care for their family members, care for their loved ones, while also continuing their employment. And it helps build family wealth building and entrepreneurship, which we will talk about a little bit more. So just thinking about all of those, how we contextualize them into some policy change. Obviously, this is not an exhaustive list, but these are just ideas and building blocks to start from that we're working towards in Tennessee and the US in general. So at the bare minimum, we're talking about beyond the minimum, but the minimum is raising that federal and state minimum wage. Here in Tennessee, we have no minimum wage. We are completely basing all of our minimum wage laws on the federal government. So obviously, we would either need to implement a higher state minimum wage or work for federal increase. And then looking at universal paid leave, there's all kinds of different ways to make universal paid leave happen. There's policies proposed where the state and employers share the cost of paid leave and employees help pay in a little bit. And it's kind of a Medicaid, Medicare type of situation, but for paid leave, there's ones where it's just employer employee, similar to health insurance. So there's all kinds of that. But what really needs to happen is that states and employers group together to get paid leave a priority and understand that paid leave helps benefit all folks. And then just one way to help work on the gender pay gap is that any contractor of the state and the state itself be required to publicly report the details of their gender pay gap. So having comparisons of what are we paying our female and female identifying workers versus our male or male identifying. And if there is these gender pay disparities, implementing immediate remedial action. So obviously, Tennessee, we might be quite far from something like that, but girl can dream. And then just looking in the investment into the caregiving infrastructure. So policies that are supportive of caregivers. So looking at paid leave, but also ways like having tax credits for being a caregiver, implementing a variety of things that help for childcare, which we'll talk about more, just investing in that caregiving infrastructure and paying the folks that are doing that hard work of giving care what they deserve. Because we know if we don't have caregivers, a whole lot of crap falls apart. And then thinking about ban the box laws. So those are, if you've ever seen or had questioned by an employer, say, well, what did you make at your previous job? So ban the box laws, ban them from asking that question, because that's a way to continue the cycle of wage gaps, especially racially and gender, by saying, what did you historically get paid? And if you historically got paid less than you were supposed to, they're going to base it off that and continue to pay you less than you deserve. So ban the box laws are a great way. Here in Tennessee, we actually preempt ban the box laws at the local level. So this would need to be a state policy to get rid of our preemption and then allow it. And you'll actually see, if you go watch our state takeovers training, quite a bit of workplace and economic dignity laws are preempted at the state level. So the state works real hard to block worker rights, but we're going to push back. And then looking at non-discrimination policies, bulking those up or rolling back those anti-DEI policies, putting them back in place, just having as much as we can to ensure that our workplaces aren't discriminating. And then any way we can advocate for wage transparency, whether that's official policy or at your local level, your organizational level, or corporations, ensuring that wage transparency is not only not dismissed or diminished, but encouraged. We need to talk about our wages, reduce the stigma around talking about wages, because when you don't talk about them, the employers get all the power. So encouraging wage transparency in your communities. So that's not a full encompassing list, but it's a good amount. I think we have a Q&A. Ooh, that's going to be a good one for when we talk about next steps. But yes, thank you so much for that question. We're going to keep moving on because we want to get to that data. So continuing to think about these policy barriers of housing, childcare, and healthcare. So we see with housing, some huge barriers to access to affordable housing, accessible quality housing. The biggest one right now, and we all are feeling it, is high rent. Across the state, in every city, we're seeing this increase in every county, this increase of rent, making it unaffordable to live in the neighborhoods we'd like to live in or in the neighborhoods we've always been able to live in. Immigration status is increasingly being one we're worried about, with employers asking about immigration status and a threat to immigrants everywhere. We're also seeing the substandard conditions or overcrowding when a family can't afford high rent somewhere, or so they try to cram as many folks as possible into a place so that they can afford to live there. We see some substandard conditions, some health issues in those overcrowding. Additionally, no credit history is a huge barrier to housing. We know they almost always ask for that credit check, or at least a credit check in. And so for folks that have never had access to credit cards, haven't been given those privileges in life, not having that credit history could be a huge barrier to housing. And then thinking about displacement and discrimination, we'll talk a little bit more about gentrification and renters displacement. And then exploitation. So we've seen I know you've had probably a landlord story of someone being a bit of a slumlord to you, but we know that this is a huge phenomenon, and these folks exploiting people, knowing they're not going to pursue legal means because they don't have the financial means or the knowledge of the legal system to pursue their rights. So they're being exploited, being forced to pay way high for really low quality housing. So you see those huge barriers, and then also thinking about the impacts of redlining. There's a red line map of Nashville right there, but we know it happened all across Tennessee and the country. But these banks not being willing to lend for housing in certain neighborhoods for different groups of folks. And then big one here we've seen in Nashville and then across the state, gentrification, where we see white folk coming into these neighborhoods, finding houses with good bones and deciding they're going to flip it. And then all of a sudden, an entire neighborhood's got a horde of tall and skinnies. We've seen that over and over, and that raises property taxes. And then all of a sudden, folks that have been able to live in this neighborhood for the last 150 years are now being pushed out. So we know we've seen that happen all over Nashville and Tennessee, and it's continuing to happen in a huge barrier to housing. And then thinking about tenant displacement for people flipping, maybe historically renter affordable housing for these luxury condos or changing them into other types of property and renters being displaced. Thinking a little bit more about housing quality, affordability, location. So making sure you're in neighborhoods with access to quality schools, good jobs, food. So grocery stores is a huge one, and medical care. And then just thinking about the impact of housing on community, of having a neighborhood where you feel safe, where you feel a connection with those around you, can be a huge part of identity and feeling part of a community, and also reducing stress and exposure to violence and crime, as well as improving performance and civic engagement. It's just the impacts of having a good community where there is safe, affordable housing. And then kind of one last thing on that from me, looking at the Black-white homeownership gap from 1900 to 2024, the statistic is kind of staggering. The gap in ownership between Black and white Americans peaked at 30% in 2020. This is larger than the 24.3% gap recorded by the census in 1900 and 27.3% in 1960 when segregation was legal. So just thinking about how much we are in a horrible state for Black versus white homeownership. All right, I'll stop yapping, hand it up.
Yeah, so with the economic justice campaign that the Equity Alliance is currently doing, it is a deep dive, deep canvas into the community. It's a holistic approach where we're having canvassing, we are hosting events to hear directly from the community on what these issues they're facing and what their number one issue is. Because once we know what their concerns are, what their issue is, we're able to set the agenda. We're able to be intentional, as we said earlier, about what we're trying to do. And so The first portion that we did when it comes to the housing was we held what we call a power and plates, where we sit down with the playmakers, we sit down with elected officials, we sit down with the experts, realtors, and we go to them and we ask them, what are people saying to you? What does home ownership mean to them when they're coming to you and saying that they need affordable houses? And we got these three answers. The first was legacy. Sitting in the room and listening to them talk about how people see home ownership as an opportunity to build memories, to be able to have generational holidays in a sense of belonging within your community, within your family, keeping your family together. We all know that having a home and being able to pass that home down to the next family member gives them a leg up at being successful. And so generational wealth, when you have the ability to uh, take equity out on your home, and when you're able to not have to pay 5 years, 10 years worth of rent and not have anything to show for it, compared to if you were able to get a house and be able to save that money and put it towards other investments. um, and then the last part was security, making sure that they understand that they do have that home to come back to. Uh, a lot of us don't have that ability to go to a different state and come back home because we don't have a home. And when you rent, when you move away, you don't get to come back home and say, hey, okay, it didn't work out in a different state. I'm back home now. I need you to move out of my apartment. No, when you have a home, you're able to do that. You're able to rent out your home to still make money, to go somewhere else and try to provide a better life for your family. And then if that doesn't work out, still be able to have that security of coming back home. And so the first portion of listening to the experts, talking to the professionals, those were the things that we were saying. But then, well, the things that we were hearing. But then we also take it a step further with actual door knocking and canvassing the community to hear specifically from the people of what they're saying. And so when we're door knocking, we ask out of these four things, what is your number one issue? And between housing, cost of food, childcare, workforce training, and others, number one across the state, not just in Montgomery County, not just in Davidson County, across the state, the number one answer for our target audience is housing, affordable housing. And we take it a step further so that we can get a deeper understanding of what it means when they say affordable housing. And next slide. Uh, the affordability of it. 50% of those people who say housing is the number one issue I'm facing right now say that it's just not affordable. And when we look into, again, the statistics that we've been going over as far as wage gaps, as far as minimum wage and what people are able to afford, it just doesn't add up. And our numbers at the door are showing that because people can't afford it. And now those two charts are based on our target audience with T of who we believe are our number one uh, mission driven people, the people that we align with, or the people that align with our mission that we see as our number one targets. But then when we look at our expansion group of people, people that we know that while they may not necessarily align exactly with us, they do still face the same issues that we see across the state. And so even the people who are not necessarily directly aligned with the Equity Alliance mission, when we're knocking the expansion doors, even they are saying 37% the number one issue that they're facing is housing. And so when we look at it, it's like this isn't just black and white. While it does affect obviously the black community and women directly more, we see that even on an expanded target audience, we are still having this people say that housing is the number one issue. And when we go into the deeper look into it, next slide, um, we see affordability. And so out of everything that we know is going on, out of everything that our doors, our experts, our campaign, our economic justice campaign is telling us right now, housing and the affordability of that housing, it's all aligning with, again, what we've been seeing, what we've been saying. and what we know policies have affected us.
Yes. Thank you so much for that incredible data. And I think just some context to add, part of why we see this affordability crisis, if you look at the number one donors to our political party, the Realtors Association, top spot for the past several years. So we know this wasn't an accident. We know that this didn't just happen, that there's an affordability crisis. This was intentional and part of the money flowing into our legislators' pockets. So had to
Absolutely.
add that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. We're going to keep moving to childcare. So Awake has been really interested in childcare. Obviously, that's right at the intersection of our mission. But thinking about childcare here in Tennessee, and cross country, 2/3 of children under 6 have all of their parents in the workforce, creating a large demand for childcare. And pre-pandemic, more than half of the country lived in a childcare desert. We saw a huge investment in childcare during the pandemic, and then a lot of those funds have now disappeared. And we're seeing once again, huge lack of access to resources for those childcare providers. And then just thinking about the cost of childcare, that consumes 37% of average family income. And then looking at for those who earn a minimum wage, as we saw in Conchetta's example, that would be about 108% of minimum wage family income. To afford childcare at the cost it is today, you can't. So just thinking about the affordability of childcare, we're struggling. And looking specifically at the importance of childcare for women, we touched on it a little bit earlier, but we know that mothers' employment is more likely than fathers to hinge on the availability of childcare. So just looking at when someone has access, a family has access to childcare, you see that employment rate 89% to 96% for fathers. But when they did not find childcare, we saw the mothers drop all the way down to 77%, but the fathers drop 1%. So we see that huge disparity there. And then just thinking about the fact that care workers are disproportionately immigrant women, we also know are disproportionately Black women. Just thinking about what that means and how childcare workers are some of the lowest paid workers. Thinking about, okay, well, the majority of these childcare workers are immigrant women and Black women. So just something to think about. We wonder why these wages are so low. And we also think about who is serving those communities. And then just something else to consider in the childcare world is just what Tennessee policies really impact that. And we see the impact of how our licensure works here in Tennessee, and all of the fees and regulations to get licensure are quite burdensome, leading to a lot of folks being unable to have this licensed childcare and kind of flying under the radar, and just doing what they can for family, friend, and neighbor care. And then also thinking about Families First, that's our version of TANF here in Tennessee, Temporary Assistance to Needy Families. We have a small child care payment assistant funds that go to certain TANF families. We already know that Tennessee barely likes to give TANF anyway, so considering that, and then looking at how our child care payment assistance is like a smaller proportion of that, it's not stretching far and is not adjusted for inflation in a proper way. So just thinking about how we're falling short in that childcare world. And then keeping going to healthcare. Access to healthcare, we know, is a necessary condition for individuals and communities to escape poverty. Good health is a precursor to achieving all other life goals, such as education and employment, which are crucial in further breaking the cycle of poverty. And we see the impact of economic disparities in access to healthcare. We have the lack of health insurance here in Tennessee and across the state and country, and having huge impacts on access to healthcare, and also high out-of-pocket costs for people paying quite a bit out of pocket because of their health insurance. And then this is especially huge in Montgomery County. We've talked about with Conchetta in the past, but limited access to healthcare facilities, people having to travel far distances to get the healthcare they need. We know that's only going to get worse after this big, horrible bill passed at the federal level. So we're going to see those impacts even worse, the lack of rural healthcare, and seeing the limited access to specialty care. So even looking at if you've ever had to find specialty care for some ailment you had, we're seeing that is even worse for people with economic disparities. And then lastly, telehealth has been proposed as a solution for a lot of these folks, but just something to consider is this assumes you have access to A, devices, and B, Wi-Fi that's consistent and available. So just thinking about that. And yeah, huge healthcare disparities are here. And then yes, Conchetta, or LeLann, go ahead.
Thank you. For the sake of time, I won't go into all of them, but within our power and plates and our community meetings, our team meetings, we conduct solution labs. This is where the community is able to give solutions based on their values, because again, one size does not fit all. And when it came to healthcare, there were some amazing feedback that were given, that was given. Some of them being provider relations, making sure that we are adequately recruiting providers for our area, but then those providers are also compensated for their time and their specialty. And recruiting specialty providers to the Middle Tennessee area. Patient education, making sure that patients understand electronic healthcare systems, their Medicare and their Medicaid benefits. Having a background in healthcare, I totally understand where a patient might think they have coverage on something, but they really don't. But this mind map that you all see are just some of the solutions that the community wanted to see implemented in Middle Tennessee. So these are the things that we're asking for of our hospital boards, of our clinical boards, of our communities that we want to see, that we feel could help us in having a better quality and option of healthcare.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And then just kind of wrapping it up with some policy ideas. And the person who asked that question, I'm kind of typing out an answer for you, but these are some ideas of policy, and there are people working on these, so I'll shout those out. An important part of all of this in policy is having city and state investment in affordable housing. We've seen here in Nashville some investment in the development of the East Bank and having some affordable housing there. But city and state investment isn't a one-time thing. It is a long-term investment that doesn't just happen in the building process, but happens in upkeep and the continued investment in those affordable housing and expansion. And within that, it means nothing if you have affordable housing that doesn't connect with transit infrastructure anywhere. So ensuring in those pushes for city and state investment, and when those affordable housing are being built, that there's transit infrastructures from that housing to the places where folks are employed. So we're ensuring that these don't just have silos of little pockets of housing with no connection to the community, and ensuring within that, making sure they're not food deserts, which we've seen in a lot of the community housing here in Nashville. Almost, I think, yeah, both of them are in food deserts. And then just something else within that space is predatory lending in housing. So ensuring that ideally banning predatory lending, or at least ending these predatory lending companies that take exploitation of these folks trying to start a family, getting housing, trying to exploit them. So trying to end those practices. And then anything working towards universal childcare. So ensuring that all folks have access to good quality, accessible childcare. Awake is going to be working on a policy on home-based childcare next year, but just looking at ways that we can invest in childcare providers and invest in the network as a whole. And then just something we shouted out during it, but raising wages for childcare workers are some of the lowest paid folks, but the most in demand, which is not how it usually works. Usually you should, if they're in demand, you pay more for it. Improving the childcare credit system. As I kind of briefly mentioned, the TANF system sucks just all around. So improving that childcare credit system at the very least. And then thinking about any ways we can start pushing more towards universal healthcare, having investments in things like Medicaid and Medicare instead of these mass cuts, and then further investments in healthcare that isn't reliant on these big insurance companies that we know do not benefit working people. So those are all my policy, but yeah, you guys please add anything that you are thinking of.
Yes, and to also answer the question from the Q&A, one, I want to say that Tennessee's state level politics is very challenging for any type of progressive thinking economic policies. So going into that mindset is, we went into our economic justice campaign knowing this, and you guys the same. So we know that the fight is ahead of us. And there are so many of us who are actively fighting on multiple levels. But with our economic justice campaign, we identified that there's the opportunity for local level wins as well. And so we're looking at phase 2 after we've done our door knocking, our phone banking, the organizing piece of it. Phase 2 is that advocacy and policy side. So we're looking for the creation of living wage ordinance for government contractors. We're asking for affordable housing requirements in development projects, especially in Montgomery County, which is one of the fastest growing areas in the state. For childcare accessibility and affordability improvements through zoning and business development. And this is in-home childcare and the center's location, daycares. And then we're also tying in transportation equity through our coalition space with Shift Nashville, a part of the Choose How You Move, and then connecting that to job access. But then, because we are who we are on the electoral side, of course, we're participating in this upcoming special election. We are doing voter education, engagement, and empowerment so that they know what their economic policy priorities should be. And then when it comes to local election, finding those candidates that understand economic justice. They understand that this is what we are looking for in a candidate who's going to show up for us when it comes to pre-K expansion, when it comes to paid family leave, when it comes to workforce development. They're going to push for the grocery tax. They're going to push for Medicaid expansion, those types of things. And so that's a part of our economic justice campaign. Phase 2, just got to make sure that our data is aligned with what the people actually want and need.
Yes. Amazing. LeLann, do you want to talk any more about like what you're up to with T, what some next steps for folks if they want to get involved in what y'all are up to? I know these folks are plugged in with Awake, but would love to open up some more for T.
Well, yeah, I don't have much of anything. Pretty much aligned with Conchetta said. We're focusing on getting the data and hearing from the people first. And once we get that information from the people, making sure that we build policy around that.
Yes, amazing. All right. Well, I dropped an answer in that Q&A, but I'm going to include some follow-up resources. But Roger, I know you had your hand up. I think I made it so you can talk. So if you want to ask your question, go for it.
It really is almost a comment because you'd need at least a week to discuss the issue.
Yeah.
In the context of Trump's in effect banning trying to ban DEI on the federal level, things that we're talking about are, I mean, the hill has gotten much, much, much higher that every organization that's working in the area has to climb. And I still have the hope that I expressed I guess it's a year and a half ago in our book club where we read about hope. But it's very saddening to see that kind of thing happen. So it's really more the comment. But if any of you want to comment on the direct impact, that's fine. But I know it has to have impact on all of these areas.
I will just a little bit. So being a Black founded, Black women led organization, it's always been hard for us to navigate within certain spaces. And because we are unapologetic in how we move and who we are working for. And so rolling back certain DEI phrase or woke, as they want to say, initiatives, it was almost laughable because it's like we've been here. We've been here. So congratulations that you woke up and got here, but for us, we've been in this space already. And so continuing to navigate these waters as if the world continues to turn for us, it continues to go full steam ahead. What we are seeing are more people who are now wanting to participate with us. So it's like you actually did us a favor. You did us a favor because now more people are coming out of that slumber. They're taking the blinders off and going, oh, this is wrong. This is wrong. So now we're seeing more community activism, neighborhood activism happening. We're seeing more people who want to be in the know, who want to be involved. Our volunteer numbers have increased tremendously. And LeLann can attest to that when we're at the doors and we ask, hey, do you want to keep in touch? They're like, yes, here, take my information and put me on the program, plug me in. So we're seeing more of a step up versus a pushback.
Yes, couldn't have said better. And I think, Roger, just something that I can't stop thinking about is Kimberly Crenshaw's work and critical race theory as race retrenchment and reform. We know that with such a push that there was in 2020, we knew that the pullback was going to happen. And what matters now is how we use that pullback to be a slingshot. And instead to say, you tried to pull us back, I wish you would. Like, as she said, the volunteers are stepping up. People are rising up and they're going to try this for the next 4 years and they're going to play dirty. But one thing about us is we aren't going to stop. So I try to ground myself in that they're predictable. They're predictable as hell. We know they're going to keep playing these cards and we know how to beat them. So I don't know, LeLann, anything else to add there?
No, I mean, you all hit it on the head. It really is, especially at the doors, an opportunity for us to get more people engaged. They are seeing how national policies and agenda are now affecting them in their daily lives. And so they're ready to get activated. They're energized about having an opportunity to be on the right side of history and be active in making their community what they really want it to be and not what someone is forcing it to become.
Yes. All right. We're over time, which is totally fine, but I'm going to send us off so we can all enjoy the rest of the evening. Everyone, thank you so much to LeLann and Conchetta for spending this last hour or so with us. We love you. We appreciate you. Y'all go follow the Equity Alliance, all their amazing work, especially. There's going to be a lot of talk about this election coming up, and they've been working in that county for quite some time. So yeah, just want to shout y'all out. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us. We appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Y'all have a good rest of your night. Email if you guys have any questions. Bye-bye.